All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I'm extremely excited today to have our guest on. If you have a 6.4 liter Powerstroke and are on Facebook, you definitely know her name. She is a legend in the 6.4 pages and has helped so many guys with so many different questions or problems that they've had with their truck. She's had an extensive experience with Ford Motor Company as a technician, and I'm just really happy to have her on today. She has been a wealth of information and definitely a blessing to the 6.4 crowd. And as you all know, 6.4s need all the blessings that they can handle. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Shayna Greenwood. Shayna is, it's just a pleasure to have you on today. And we are so excited that you took the time to join us.
No, I'm glad to be here.
Well, tell me a little bit about, I see you on the pages all the time, and me and you've been friends for a good long while now. And we see so many times that, you've got guys that are on the pages asking questions. Tell me a little bit about, but you never get to know about the person behind, the Facebook page, and all their experiences and what they've kind of gone through and their diesel history. So can you tell the folks listening a little bit about yourself?
My dealings with Ford Diesel started when I was a little kid with the 6.9. My dad plays mechanic. He's actually a master electrician, but at the time he was a logger, and all he had was, the 6.9s, which eventually turned into the 7.3 Powerstroke. He rebuilt those engines. He had me in the engine bay with him. I can tell you, he definitely wanted a little boy, and he was stuck with me, and it didn't matter to him. So he was one of those people that he understood, kind of like the why of it. I don't want just the answer. I want to know why.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think, I just become enthralled in the 6.4 pages is because, for one, I had a 6.4. But two, there's a lot of things that go on in the 6.4 world where everyone just has an answer, but they never tell anybody why.
Right. Yeah. Analytical thinking is definitely something that is a thing of the past, unfortunately. In the day we live, it's load up the parts cannon and just kind of shoot it at it and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. It seems like most people would rather throw parts at something than take the time and have it troubleshot correctly or go to a shop that can do the work. I see a lot of shops around here. I'm in Abilene, Texas. There are shops that have 6.4s piled out all over in front of them. I can tell you why they're there. Because they can't fix them or it's too expensive to fix them, so they just get parked. And I was offered a job by somebody here in town, full-time on as a diesel mechanic. But since I lost my leg, which was inside of a wonderful Ford Excursion, that was like my 7.3, I loved it to death, had it forever. And after that, being able to get up and down on top of things is a little bit tougher. And being in the Texas heat, it's not a lot of fun. But I have no problem if somebody breaks down on the side of the road if they need help. I have rescued people all over the state of Texas. I've had people just stop by my place and we do troubleshooting.
Yeah.
There was a guy that actually stopped in. He got a hold of me through Facebook. He had a truck that kept going into limp mode. He had just bought it from somebody here in Abilene, one of the auto dealers. And come to find out, the oil cooler had ruptured. And funny part is the truck just had paperwork saying that the oil cooler had been fixed.
Oh, man.
Obviously. But they went ahead and took my word and let him take all the money that he'd put into that truck so far and put it towards another vehicle. So that helped a lot.
Yeah, that's we see our share of horror stories. It's terrible. You get so many of those. We posted recently one with a rag in the intake. There was another one that came through with fuel that just literally was the crankcase was full of fuel. And wiped out thankfully it didn't wipe out the bearings. It was so bad that it actually had filled the crankcase full of fuel and got on top of the piston and bent 6 out of 8 connecting rods.
Ouch.
Yeah,
fuel dilution, most people with a stock one, a lot of people don't know because I run a big, large RV resort here now in Abilene, and we get a lot of 6.4s in. But my problem is you just as many problems in a 6.7 and a 6 liter that come in here in any other engine when they break down.
Yeah.
But people have no idea about fuel dilution. These guys are pushing these trucks on 10,000-mile oil changes, and they're stock.
Yeah, I thought
That's
that was always funny. Now you were a Ford tech, so you remember when they first came out, and that's Ford was actually saying when they first came out that this was a low maintenance engine, which I thought was hilarious now because nothing could be further from the truth. But they were telling you that you could run, I think it was 12,000 miles on oil changes, something like that, and then they said that if you found as much as 2 quarts of oil, or maybe even more during an oil change, that was perfectly normal. There's nothing to be worried about.
But then they dropped it to 5%, and 5% is still a lot. If you know the properties of oil and what diesel does to oil,
yep,
we wouldn't be happy with that situation at 5%.
No, not at all. No, we've seen more bearing failures from fuel dilution than any other. Hands down, 95% of the time bearing failure occurs. It's almost always due to fuel dilution. And you think about, oil has 3 different things that it has to do. It has to cool the engine, it has to clean the engine, it has to lubricate the engine. And when you take and you are reducing the viscosity of that oil through diesel fuel, the hydrodynamic wedge that is so imperative for it to have is you've taken the protection of the engine completely away. And people just don't think about that much. They think, how can I get that 10,000-mile oil change? Oil's cheap compared to an engine. Yeah.
Then that's why I tell everybody when they don't want to buy OEM filters or OEM sensors and things, it's like it's cheaper in the long run. The let's say the EVP sensor, a lot of people go through them, especially now the trucks are 13 years old plus. I'm like, look, that OEM sensor lasted you that long. Why are you being so cheap to not put in that extra 15 or 20 bucks to get an OEM sensor?
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely.
I don't give on sensors ever.
No.
Always. Yeah.
Filters are definitely our nemesis. With the aftermarket Wix filters, you can fill in the blank here, but the FL 2016 filters, not that much, $10 to $13, maybe even more, depending on where you're at. You might pay as much as $18.
It's $17 at our Walmart.
Yeah, why wouldn't you do it? But I see more engines that are compromised or damaged due to something like that, and it's the little. It's the little foxes that spoil the vines, but it's the little things that make the big difference like that. So, yeah, as an engine builder, it's definitely been tough for us. So you were a Ford technician, and which dealership were you at?
So I was chased down by actually a Ford dealership here and never actually went through with it. Mm-hmm. In fact, I was stayed up and I worked with a guy across the street. He was working on 6 liters and 6.4s all the time. Mm-hmm. This little guy was amazing. He was a lot like the Ford Tech Ron that everybody buys the diesel Tech Ron.
Yep.
And that's where I learned about the 6 liter. He worked with me on my 7.3. My 7.3 liked to eat transmissions. That was the problem with that. But one of the major reasons why I never went through and became part of Ford's fleet service, went out there and did what they were doing, was the fact that I had a job that paid for 3 kids, and 2 of them were incredibly premature and needed a lot of medication.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah,
but I got tons of buddies that are Ford techs. I got some that I don't know. I mean, they're the biggest brands on earth. They make me look like an idiot.
I find that hard to believe. You do an excellent job on the pages and answering the many questions that you get hammered with throughout. And I know the guys on the 6.4 pages are greatly appreciative of it. And I am as well, because it's a big service, especially when there's so many guys on the pages. Sometimes it's so hard to try to help, and there's so much bad information, like we're talking about, so much bad information that you got to be extremely careful on who you trust, and it's frustrating because you see that answer, and unfortunately people think because the vast majority of the people say this or that, then that must be the right answer, but nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah, there's a lot of, especially when it comes to the electrical side of things, people just start throwing parts at it, and they're like, oh yeah, this is what I did to change this. And it's like, no, you end up changing a part in between that actually changed the problem, but you just continue going.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't know, and I wake up, I probably have 10, 15 private messages from people needing help.
Yeah.
And being able to kind of wind down for my day, I mean, I'm up super early, I run this place, I'm always on call. So it's my wind down time, being able to help guys out.
Yeah,
and I don't mind explaining something 10 different ways, and so they understand.
Right.
Because I think a lot of the 6'4" rap just comes from people with bad experiences or people who have used a truck and the truck didn't stand out. Wouldn't tolerate it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I love a 6'4". I think they're a fantastic truck. I think that, as we all know, they've definitely had their issues from the factory. There's no doubt about that. But when done right and when they have a solid foundation on them, they're hard to beat. They really are. So you go ahead and get that.
I got it.
All right.
You got it out there. I ain't got to answer that.
But anyway.
That's probably one of my biggest things is that there's just so much bad information out there. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
There's even texts online that you go right into the tech and the truck creates an answer, and they're talking about putting a high pressure oil pump in your 6'4" that's having problems.
Right.
Like, you obviously don't know the truck, you don't know the platform.
Right.
Just keep your mouth shut.
Right. Yeah. The next thing is the spark plugs. Yeah. I know. Everybody sees that. But anybody that can see through it because they've been in it, it's frustrating. But and then at the same time, you're trying to help the customer, or not the customer, but the person online, and your opinion or what your statement is no different than the guy over here that's maybe a 16-year-old kid doesn't even have his driver's license. He has no clue about the truck, but it doesn't matter because one voice is the same as the other. So it makes it difficult, but that's the reason why we do these podcasts, because it's one thing to be a keyboard warrior. It's another thing to be able to take questions on, go one by one, and be able to sit down and answer them and try to help people. And that's what we're going to do today. So we've got a list of questions that were asked to us on the 6'4" pages. So we're going to go ahead and jump into those. If you feel like a little bit of game show type question and answer, we'll go ahead and get started with that. So now we're into the question segment of the show. So we want to go ahead and address some that have been asked to us. Now, keep in mind, if you've got some questions about your 6'4" or your Powerstroke or your Cummins or Duramax, please send them in. You can email us the questions. We'll do our best to help you with whatever the situation may be on that. But we have a list of questions today, and we'll go ahead and get started with that. So the first question comes from Rob, and he's asking me he has a page. If you are building a 6'4" for high RPMs, do you need to add oil clearance? So that's a good question, Rob. We definitely have a lot of experience with higher horsepower 6'4s. And, one of the things that is asked in that question, obviously, the added oil clearance, the answer to that is yes, because of fluid film friction. So when you start having a higher RPM, basically what you do is have a stack of oil that's trying to exit. You have a shear rate of that oil that creates actually more friction. Now, 40% of the heat in the engine that's dissipated. We talked about the cooling, the cleaning, and the lubricating that was provided by oil. 40% of that heat is extracted by the oil itself. So that's a tremendous amount of burden on that oil. So by doing so, when you're spinning a higher RPM like that, with higher fluid film friction, it's definitely important. Typically what we see, there's a trade-off, with the new 6.7s. Shayna, I know you've seen this. The newer 6.7s are running, I don't know if you paid much attention to the 2020s, but now they're running a variable stage pump. And some of the reasons why they're seeing that is because the oil clearances that they began with were running as tight as 7/10 clearance. Now, for our listeners that may not know what 7/10 equates to, the human hair, depending on ethnicity, is about 3/1000 of an inch. That's pretty incredible when you think that maybe 1/4 of the human hair is what the oil clearance actually is. That's extremely tight. So obviously, one other thing about running a higher RPM is that you have more deflection with the crankshaft, with the connecting rods, and the bearing surfaces. And that thing's, it's controlled explosions, and 8 of them are happening in every 90 degrees of rotation of the crankshaft. So there's a tremendous amount of chaos that's going on, and it's all controlled based off of the block and the oil and the bearings that are trying to keep everything from blowing and scattering all over the road. So added clearances for the deviation is definitely suggested on that. You got anything you want to kind of touch on that, Shayna?
I just think that people, if you're making like a dedicated sled truck or a race truck, then people need to know if you're going to be running tight tolerances, you have to run a synthetic oil. You have to run something that the viscosity matches what you're running. You can't just put 1540 in there and go after it. You're going to have a problem.
Yeah, that's a good point, because there's so many things that people want. And I think that goes to another question that we were asked on another episode, was somebody saying something about they didn't know 10W30 versus 15W40. What's the right oil? And the truth of the matter is that the right oil for the racing application, like you just pointed out, is not the right oil for the daily driver. What determines the right oil is a couple of things. One is the ambient temperature in which it's going to be operated. Second is the bearing clearances that you're going to actually use. So typically the higher the bearing clearances or the looser the bearing clearances are, the thicker the viscosity. Because there's four things that we know about oil, as Lake Speed always says. It's the right oil, the right place, the right amount, the right time. And it doesn't, if one of those four things are not in place, bearing starvation and engine failure can occur. So it's important to match up. What ran in Grandpa's tractor doesn't work in the 6.7s. We've seen that through a tremendous amount of bearing failures, especially from about the 11 to 16 model 6.7s, where guys are just, the manufacturer call for a 5W oil, and guys are running 15 and they're having dry startup issues. That engine's a whole other story with a whole other set of problems, but it definitely is something that it needs to be considered when you're choosing and selecting right oil.
I would definitely say oil is very misunderstood. You see the pages and pages upon people asking about what is the right oil. It depends on where you're at, what you're doing with the truck, with the temperature. There's so many things that go into it.
Right.
That everybody says, if I put 5W40 in there, it's going to be like water, and I can hear that engine making so much more noise.
Right.
Okay, that engine oil still acts the same way at operating temperature as 1540. That's what's important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Getting in touch with, if you have an engine that's been rebuilt by your machine shop, it's always important to see what their bearing clearances were set to. Are they what the standard clearances are? Because, we got guys that run a 6.7, and after we machine the blocks, we open the clearances up a little bit, and we suggest running a little bit heavier weight oil. So it's always good to get in touch with the machine shop, make sure. So I hope that answers your question, Rob, and thanks for asking. So the next question comes to us from Jake. He says, I'm spitting coolant on a hot tune, but it won't do it on stock or tow. I've done a block test at normal temps and idle temps and found nothing. I've got brand new Promax heads and studs. I've done all the proper torque, specs, and sequence. This isn't my first rodeo. So I checked, and there wasn't any coolant mixing either. All right. You want to take that one?
Sure. My first question is, what year is the truck?
Okay.
If it's a Job 108 and you're filling to that fill line and you're putting it under pressure, like you're stomping on it, making that truck go under heavy load, you're going to puke coolant. That's why Ford upgraded the bottle in the later Job 08, Job 2s. That way they could turn around and move that fill line down. The first fill line's like that far above the seam. Second one's about that far.
Yeah.
Those Job 8s, you can let them puke and they'll end up with about an inch visible. And that's where they're happy.
Yeah.
If it's not a Job 108, my thing is block test. Yeah, it's a great tool, but I would rather pressure test and see what kind of pressure is ending up in that degas bottle more than trusting a block test.
That's a very good point. I can't tell you how many times I've done a block test and had them lots. So, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, pressurizing or doing a pressure test, just driving it down the road with a long tube that you can get onto the cap and accelerating hard. Now, the reasons for that, there's probably a guy that's running a can tune from, I won't name it, we'll call it Hotel in Sierra, but whatever. Those are generally the tunes, the can tunes that we see that are running more than 32 degrees injection timing. Then all you're really doing, and I always make this analogy, if anybody's ever played, what was it, the game, that you play with a ball that's attached to a string.
Tetherball?
Tetherball, thank you. Can't even think of it. Thanks. Tetherball. So, if you're playing tetherball and that ball's coming around and there's just a perfect time to be able to hit it to get the most velocity out of that ball. The problem with it is if you swing too early, you wind up jamming your finger. You swing too late, and then you don't get the force that would be applied to the ball. That's the connecting rod relationship between the connecting rod and rotational assembly and the injector. And what happens is when you start cranking up the injection timing, you start injecting the fuel in, and instead of it trying to act like the tetherball and force the piston back down the cylinder, it's actually trying to force the cylinder back down the other direction. But before doing so, it creates a tremendous amount of cylinder pressures. And that's probably the reason why you're seeing it on a hotter tune than you are on the other tunes. Good injection timing is absolutely imperative. We see more piston cracking, rod bending, pistons melting because of higher cylinder temperatures. Just a lot of bad situations, and all are expensive. So I would consider, find out what my injection timing would be on that.
Yeah, definitely. I always tell people quality custom tuning. Yeah. Just like what used to come on SCT.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was just junk. But I also know that most people aren't going to jump all over their truck in a tow tune. They're going to want to go onto an extreme or a race tune, and that's when they jump on it, and that's when they see the puking coolant. So, unless you're putting that truck underneath the same, situation every time, you can't say, oh, it didn't do it here and it didn't do it here. Right. It just happens to be the nature of the beast. What are you going to do? Some guy challenges you, you're going to turn it up, and you're going to go smoke his ass. That's what you're going to do.
Yeah, that's just it's been the 6.4 gets blamed for so many things, and the problem with it is the 6.4, where you can tune a 6.0, there's always a fuse, and I got a good buddy, Chuck Lynch, that always talks about this, and he's absolutely right. There's a fuse to whatever you do. If you with a 6.0, you wind up having higher boost pressures, and then the head gasket lets loose, and you fix the head gasket, and you continue to push the truck. The next weakest link is what always winds up breaking. On the 6.4s, guys just have so much power that you can get out of that truck, especially, which leads me to the next question. And I'm going to skip over Cody, so I'm going to come right back to his question, go on to Brennan's question here. It says, did compound turbos create too high of a drive pressure for the 6.4? If so, then why? So, I want you to take this because you started talking about exhaust back pressure sensors earlier on, and that's extremely important for these. Go ahead. What's your experience with the 6.4 and high drive pressures?
I haven't really had an issue with it. Typically, if you were seeing something with incredibly high drive pressure, you'd be lifting heads, having issues like that.
Right.
Blowing heat gaskets. I had mine on a tow tune going uphill. Yeah, I hit 61 PSI. I backed out of it. It's not really where I wanted to be. But I don't think it's just drive pressure alone that damages these trucks.
Right. Yeah. Well, the 6.4, that's an interesting thing because with a compound turbo setup or a dual sequential turbo setup, we'll call it, this is the only truck that was ever manufactured that was put in an F-Series or a light-duty pickup, we'll call it, 3/4 ton, 1 ton pickup that had that setup. And because of that, it allows for something that, I've discussed this on other podcasts and things, but, that 6.4 will make boost at 1,500 RPMs where your 6.0 is just starting to spool up. which is
And
great.
it's hard to get used to the 6.7 because I'm so used to just that, you get your foot on the pedal in that 6.4 and you're gone.
Yep.
You do it on the 6.7, you gotta wait, you got that leg, and then it finally kicks in. 6.7's, it's fast, it's a good setup, but it doesn't have near the feel of a 6.4.
It really, you're absolutely right. It doesn't. They're apples and oranges. They're completely different. So single sequential turbo is what the 6.7 has, guys that are listening, for the earlier year model turbochargers. And they tried to do something like that with a mirror image compressor wheel. And it didn't really turn out too good for them. It seemed like it had really good spool up. The trade-off with it is they tried to shrink that turbo down with the AR housing and be able to spool it up to give it that feel of a small turbo. Problem with it is guys put a tuner on the truck and overspool it and blow the turbo to pieces. And actually, a horror story, I had a guy, I was test driving a vehicle that I did literally just routine maintenance on this thing, and the turbo let loose and took the engine out because it passed through the aftercooler on those trucks where it wouldn't have on an intercooler, and metal went through the guy's engine, and I ended up having that. It was a bad situation. I wanted to have to cover that for the guy, but no fault of ours, but it was just, wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. But the compound setup, or I refer to it as dual sequential turbo setup, allows for a higher drive pressures at lower RPMs. So because of that, another analogy, it's a sustained load. When I was flying aerobatics, we would go out and we could pull as much as 8 Gs on an airplane. Well, our 8 G and the guy that's flying an F-18 Hornet, whereas he would only pull maybe 6 Gs, he has a G suit on, or he has to be more concerned about G-lock because our high G of 8 might be on and off really quick. So there's no drain or force or drag that's on us to allow the blood to drain from your head to your toes. Whereas he could hold that load, and it would knock the guy out in the front seat, no problem. The same kind of setup sort of works on the way of the velocity of the piston. Now, as that piston is going up and down, when you start slowing that RPM down and you start increasing the drive pressure, what winds up happening is by increasing that drive pressure, you're sustaining the load on the rod, so it's having to bear under that load for a longer duration of time. And because of that, it winds up causing bent connecting rods, and we see a lot of those in the 6.4s. So just being able to make boost at low RPMs, it's great, but it has a trade-off. It's like everything. There's good things and there's bad things that come from it, and that's one of the bad things. So, a good exhaust back pressure sensor that's clean, that's reading correctly, a good tune that's not trying to make a ton of boost at a low RPM. It's the same thing. How many guys do you hear, Shayna, that always say, "Oh man, on connecting rods, I can make 800 horse on a stock set of connecting rods." A lot of guys will tell you that, and here we are. We're seeing guys that are really having issues at making 700 horsepower out of them. But the difference is where you're making that horsepower. If you're creating that horsepower and extending it because you have a larger turbocharger setup and lower drive pressures, and you're having to spool to make that power at 3,200 RPM, at 3,400 RPM, or 2,800 RPM, you're a lot better off. So I hope that answers the question. It's not just a yes or no. Does it create too much drive pressure? No, not in the right environment. Right? I guess that's right.
I always tell people you pay to play. Whenever you start changing the setup, that's when you're going to find the weak point within your engine.
Yep, that's exactly right. There's that fuse again, right? So, all right. Well, thanks, Brendan, for that question. We'll move on to Cody. Cody, we have a question here. He says, I believe the track bar ball joint on my truck is gone. So I rock the steering back and forth of the whole body, seats side to side, and the truck's steering completely stinks. Any recommendations for a new one, or should I just push out the old ball joint and replace just it? Shayna?
Well, first off, when you're redoing track bars, it's not just the ball joint. You got that bushing as well, and that bushing can wear out and cause issues. There's enough stuff in the front end of our trucks that can make them do odd things, make it feel weird from side to side. You get the death wobble, you get all these different things. There's so many components into more than just it's one thing. Like you hear all the time, well, you got the death lockable track bar bushing. That doesn't always fix it. I mean, when was the last time the truck was aligned? Did anybody look at alignment on it? What are his tires like? You gotta go throughout the whole thing. Is the truck lifted? Just throwing parts at it, and if he doesn't know, I mean, the part is super cheap from Ford. It's like $90 for a track bar. If you got a lift, you're running something offset, go ahead, go with, adjustable track bar ends. But as far as, everyday people, take it in and have it aligned. They will tell you what is wrong with it. How come they can't align it? Right. Don't just go throwing pieces at it. Right.
Yeah, it's a component. It's only one component, but it's a system. And like you said, in machining, we do the same thing. They're stack-up clearances. So where you might have slop here, and it may be tight over here, or you think it's tight over here, down the line, all of that will be it affects your steering and the play that's in the steering wheel, because anything that creates play is going to be transferred back to that steering wheel. So as far as an aftermarket recommendation, I mean, Moog used to be kind of the go-to on that. What do you suggest?
It's 10-1, half a dozen the other. Honestly, whenever I find myself in this situation, I just go back to Ford parts.
Yeah.
As far as aftermarket stuff, I haven't played in it a lot. My Excursion had a 10-inch lift-on 40s. That whole lift kit was made by Rancho a long time ago, and they got rolled in 2012. Haven't dealt with it since. Mm-hmm. Aftermarket isn't always better.
That's a fact. That's definitely a fact. I think that the lift kits, some of the cheaper lift kits definitely do create more of the problems for guys than what they realize. So
I think that people get this high of being able to say, okay, I've got all these parts on my truck and run off 10 different names.
Right.
And they have no idea why they put it on their truck. They're like just a bragging rights that this is what I have.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Aftermarket is not always better. So again, that boils down. It goes all the way back to what we originally were talking about with OE parts for filters or for sensors or whatever it might be. So, check it out. Make sure that whatever you're doing with a lift kit like that, I don't know what the situation is with that truck, but with a lift kit like that, it might be, sometimes it might be that's creating more problems than anything else. So thanks for that question, Cody. We're going to go ahead and move on to William. He says, the last 3 times I pulled my trailer, I end up with a check engine light for a day or so, but then it goes away. I had it plugged in AutoZone and suggest replace the turbocharger assembly. I just got the truck a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know much about it yet, but it was suggested to me that it may be tuned up too high. Could be the problem. When I plug the programmer to try to find out where it's set, it won't let me. It just gives me these 3 fault codes. I believe that one's a 132B. Has to do with the turbocharger. Does this mean it's going bad, or could it be something to do with the program? Shayna?
I wish people would really get the codes. I know P132B is typically an issue with the actuator.
Yep.
Or it could be something as much as that unison ring or the high pressure turbo has sooted down in, it can't move. Therefore, it's binding the actuator. Is it a tuning problem? Probably not. At this point, if you can't get in to tune a truck anyways and knock it down, there's not a lot he can do. But his biggest thing is get those 3 codes and put them up somewhere where somebody can help him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because that P132B is typically paired with a 22, or was it P2262?
Yeah.
And that's what they go with.
Right. Yeah, and keep in mind, just the way that question was written, he plugged it in at AutoZone and suggests to replace the turbocharger assembly. There's never a time when you plug a truck in that it tells you, hey, replace this part. What that means is that the computer sees there's a deficit in a certain area or whatever it might be, but it's outside the parameters within a certain amount of time frame. So it's not telling you just to go ahead and throw a part at it. There's plenty of guys out there who would love to throw a part at it for you, and they can charge you. Folks fuss about expensive mechanics, and the old adage is true. If you think a cheap mechanic's expensive, try, or a good mechanic's expensive, try hiring a cheap one, and that's so true. It really you need to do your due diligence in diagnosing that. That can be multiple things, even down to an EGR valve, but actuator, wiring, tuning. So just make sure, find a good shop that you can trust. It's not just that it has a business license, because that does not constitute a good shop, but one that actually knows their stuff. And if you have any trouble with that, give us a call. We'll be glad to put you in touch with a good shop there in your area.
There's a reason why they're back there handing you parts and they're not working in a shop.
Right.
There's quite the price difference there, and I've stood behind them and just told people have been told complete lies about the codes. They just bring them 5 parts, throw it on. Okay, this is what you need.
Yeah.
Not even close.
No, because those are expensive parts. And the thing about a 6.4 is unfortunately, most of the things that you do with a 6.4 are going to require pulling the cab. Yeah, guys are going to say, "Oh, I can do it without pulling the cab." Yes, you can. The truth of the matter is, unless you're up north, if it's down south, and you don't have to deal with the rust, we're going to pull the cab to do that job. It's just easier for us to get to the back bolts. It's way easier. I mean, a dog can walk on its hind legs, but it's a whole lot more natural the other way. So you don't want to guess, because it's such a big venture to get into. But anyway.
I ask 20 questions before I start getting into people's questions.
Yep.
I try to get a background, and if you really want help, let us know what you're doing. Were you driving it down the road? Has it been sitting there parked for a while? Now it won't start. Give us everything you can. Remember, just because there's not a check engine light or an MI light does not mean that codes aren't present.
That's right. That's exactly right. There's a difference between a hard code and a soft code, and one will set an engine light, the other one will not. So make sure you get all the data. You can't make bricks without clay, right? You got to have data. So anyways, thanks for that question, William. We have another question from Bruce. It's my 2010 F-250 Powerstroke has intermittent random TTS gauge sweeping, which is followed by a tidal wave of length issues. The two worst are no upshifting. An engine cooling fan goes into full airplane mode when the gauge sweeps from normal temp to full cold C on the gauge. We removed the transmission pan, replaced the TTS, inspected the wiring for TTS, and the inspection of the transmission pan. Perform materials, okay. Is there a tuner available that controls the engine fan? Better yet, a tuner available to put fixed reference signal to the ECM to override the false signal from the TTS gauge to the ECM. Shayna?
First thing I gotta know is what codes are present. Typically, anytime you're dropping your temperature from your trans temp, the engine's gonna go into the protect itself mode. So does the transmission. While you're stuck inlet mode. So you replaced the sensor. Was it replaced with an OEM sensor, or was it something cheap off of eBay?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Was the harness actually troubleshot with people testing out pins and seeing what the reference voltage is at that sensor, or they're just guessing and throwing it back together and throwing it back in there?
Yeah.
But you're not going to do tuning that's going to shut off that reference and all that stuff that goes into the fan clutch in these trucks.
No.
Because it takes multiple criteria for that fan clutch to come on.
Well,
but
it kind of reminds me of a guy that I remember working on a truck one time. This is the only time I've ever seen it. I actually took a picture of it. But he had an oil leak. It wasn't a bad oil leak, but it was an oil leak. And what he wound up doing was making a nice, nifty little metal pan. And he would put thick carpet right underneath where it was so that the oil would drop onto the carpet. And he would replace the carpet whenever he needed it. I promise, if I'm lying, I'm dying, as Jerry Clower would say. But it's not fixing the problem. By making this tuner to override something else, it doesn't fix the issue. What you need to do is find out why the thing's having a problem, because there are no such things as isolated events in what we do. The way that, intake air temperature sensor, who would have thought it? But it absolutely changes your shift points in your transmission, because it's looking to find out how cold it is outside and when it needs to change and when it needs to shift. If you're seeing a problem with your transmission temperatures and it does not know there's a thermal valve in the trans to change the shift point, it's actually a mechanical valve. But the shift points in the transmission that are controlled, it can actually lead to premature transmission failure in what you're doing right there. The fan needs to kick on high. You don't want the fan not to kick on high when it's needed. That's the whole purpose of having that. Ford engineers didn't just design this stuff and just for the fun of it. There are specific reasons for that. There's an orange, I think it's an orange and brown wire That's the reference wire, though, on the sensor that you're talking about. It should be reading less than 4.5 volts at ambient temperatures. And as it gets hotter, the voltage will decrease. So it's inversely proportional to what you would think. So it's definitely important to monitor that. If you've replaced that sensor, again, most likely, there's about 3 major things that are in this. There's the PCM, the wiring, and the sensor. We just actually had one in the shop just yesterday, I think it was, and had the same issue. And it wound up being the wiring harness. I hesitate to tell anybody that, because as soon as you tell somebody that, they go replace the harness. I didn't fix my issue. I'm telling you to diagnose it. But definitely check that. It's important to make sure you figure out what's going on with that, because it won't just affect that. It's going to affect other things as well. So.
Well, on these trucks, it takes in oil temp, coolant temp, ambient temperature. But if you were to shut that off, your AC would suck.
That's exactly right. Which would eventually kill your air conditioning compressor, because your head pressures are going through the roof.
There's a lot more into it, and the 6.4 was ahead of its time with a lot of the programming. Mm-hmm. And that's where the tuning side of it, getting somebody who understands it, it's essential. If you want tuning for a vehicle, it's going to last.
Yep, that's exactly right. They're
not a fun vehicle to sit there and just play with, because one day of playing with it can destroy it forever.
Yeah, but that's a really good point. Yeah, if that fan is not kicking on and cycling correctly, your air conditioning unit, this is what people don't get. They really don't see how much of there's not one, and I say this all the time, an engine is a system. There is no individual component. Everything is affected by the next thing. So, and you're exactly what you're talking about. Perfect example. That AC compressor, your head pressures are going to start climbing and climbing as the heat, as it starts getting warmer outside. The reason that fan kicks on is to be able to reduce the amount of, to lower the line pressure in the condenser, so that when it goes back through the evaporator and it sprays from a liquid to a gas, that it's able to absorb the heat that's in the cab. But the head pressure from that will cause your AC compressor to fail. So it's important that you fix that, because now you're thinking, how in the world does my transmission have anything to do with my air conditioner? Everything is a unit. It's all working together. It's not an isolated component. So fix it right. Figure it out. Don't rig it. That's the best advice anybody can give you.
Yeah, we've had tuning in the past on the 6.4 world where guys were going in writing tuning and turning off certain codes like the P0088. Codes that were important.
Yep.
And that's scary. There's trucks out there that have issues, and there's no check engine light.
Right. Makes it really hard for the next guy working on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's something where a lot of the techs today don't get the hands-on troubleshooting that, growing up working on a 6.9 or being in a 7.3 or even a 6-liter. Yep. These new folks have tons of computers. I am not nearly as into my 6.7 as I'm into my 6.4 that I wish I still had.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, the job ones were complete junk. All I ever put in mine was exhaust back pressure sensor, 2 positive battery terminals, and a fuel rail pressure sensor, and a harness. That was it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're
good trucks. You just have to take care of them.
Yeah, that's a fact. Yeah, generally it's loose nut behind the wheel a lot of times. Or the bad thing about it is not to lay that on all the drivers and the owners of the trucks. A lot of times it's people they really just don't understand. They're not mechanics. They don't understand that how you could do one thing and it would affect so many other things. So many tuners out there that don't know what in the world they're doing. They just know that when they mash the skinny pedal on the right, it goes faster. And that's got to be better tuning because it goes faster, or it's got better acceleration, or whatever. That's not the rule for good tuning. That's not the way to judge whether or not you have proper tuning in your vehicle. There's a lot of things that go in. And the truth is the more you learn, the more you know, the more it scares you, because you realize how in the world did I get by with doing it that way? It's kind of, I always talk about comp cams. A friend of mine, Billy Godbold, said, they didn't have a ADCOL test machine to test their camshafts for years, but they got the first one that didn't send the camshaft out for three days. because they realized the surface finish was not what they really wanted it to be. So, but with education, there is definitely well, the more you know, the more you can be wearing and save you a lot of money.
And now for something completely different.
So we have a certain segment, Shayna, that we have the stupid question of the week, and we save that one for the last. All right, so I'm going to let you take this one. It says, my mechanic replaced my glow plugs, and I wanted to make sure he wasn't a liar. So I took off my valve cover, and I had my brother crank my truck while I stood out in the front in the dark in our garage. Now, I'm all kinds of angry because I didn't see any glow from any of the glow plugs. I figured they'd be glowing up like crazy, like those plastic stars that kids put on their ceiling. But I don't see anything. Help! Should I call the cops?
No, just need to understand that the end of that glow plug is, down through the head. It's not there where you're going to see it, just standing in front of it.
I would call the cops. Definitely. I think the guy ripped you off, man. Call him, make us a video, let us know how it turned out for you.
I will tell you, my mom embarrassed me so bad when I was a kid. She wouldn't have the oil change in our diesel truck. Just driving it home, the 30 miles home, she was afraid they didn't change it. She pulled out the dipstick and it was already starting to get black. And she was convinced that they didn't change her oil.
Yeah, I've had folks say that before to me. That's so true. You have people all the time that will think that. Like the 6 liter. I mean, how much oil is in the rails? You've at least got 2 quarts of oil between the rails and the cooler. So it's going to be dirty, black anyways, when you get done with it. And that goes...
Well, if you're doing an oil change when it's hot, like if you stop in someplace and they change your oil in 15 minutes, you're not getting a lot of that oil out of that engine. You're just not.
Now, Duramax hold, we tested it one time just on some of the earlier model Duramaxes. They've got a hump in the pan, and that pan will actually hold another quart of oil in that pan. So you're not really getting it all out. But you can only do so much, but there's aftermarket pans there that actually will do a better job of allowing you to drain that. But anyway, so I definitely call the cops for sure.
I'm sure they'd get a laugh out of that. They probably wouldn't even know what glow plugs are.
That guy ripped you off. You let us know who that shop was, and we will post them up. Blast them. So anyway, well, man, I cannot begin to tell you, Shayna, thank you so much for the time out of your day. I know you're an extremely busy person, but I greatly appreciate your time that you've taken to answer some of these questions and just be on the segment with us, man. It's been fun.
It was fun. It was a nice break.
Yeah, that's quite a, I'm sure, a headache sometimes where you're at doing with the campers down there with guys coming in. But I'm sure that you see a lot of guys with diesel trucks for sure down there, and a lot of problems. So even though that you're not at the dealer or at the shop anymore, you're definitely you're seeing a lot of vehicles with a lot of problems still.
Yeah, we get them in here all the time. Just like people don't understand these newer diesels. Yeah, you can let them idle a little bit longer than like the 6.4 kind.
Yeah. But
I had a guy that was letting his truck idle for 8 hours a night because his wife didn't want the dog inside the camper with them.
Oh man.
And with the limp mode, the whole, it puts it in limp mode that tells you to pull over safely.
Yeah.
I limped him from the other side of the highway over here, and his DPF was completely clogged, of course.
Yeah. Sure.
So the 2 manual regens had to go get fuel in between the 2 because when you do a manual regen on a 6.7, it lasts forever and it's loud.
Mm-hmm.
And that poor truck, it fixed everything, but try to tell him you can't do that to these trucks.
No, that's a fact. Yeah, that's a mess. But at least the dog had air conditioning, right?
Yeah, I've seen ruptured EGR coolers on an EGR cooler on a 6 liter. The guy continued to drive on it. Crack both of his heads.
Yeah, we'll do it. No doubt. Definitely. So
we get them all in here. And, my husband's a decent mechanic as well. And his thing is the Cummins. And so that's where he likes to play. And I deal with Powerstrokes. And I don't know what to say about the Duramax.
Yeah. Yeah, the Duramaxes are always seems like one or two things: wiring or fuel systems or a broken crankshaft.
Yeah, they like to do the electrical gremlin thing. What you troubleshoot it to is usually not the problem. You gotta keep on troubleshooting after you change that. Goes, nope, not it.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you so much for taking your time. I greatly appreciate it. And,
for a break from the monotony here.
There you go. Well, I will let you get back to your drunken employees and your dog.
The drunken employee's gone back to her abode. The dogs are still here, and I like the dogs a lot better.
I don't blame you. I would too. If you need anything, Shayna, you give me a shout, and I will holler. I'll see you later, okay?
All right, bye.
Bye. All right, guys. So thanks so much for your questions. We greatly appreciate it. We love to take time to try to help as much as we can in the industry. But be sure, if you will, to like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook, Choate Engineering Performance, as well as Instagram. The links below. Keep the questions coming. Thanks a bunch, and see you next time. Are you ready now? Oh my gosh, not this thing again. You've got to be kidding me. It's facing the wrong way. That's right. I told him not to do that, but whatever.
It seems to make him happy.
It does. It's true. It's the little things with him.